Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be covering the do nots of writing for concert band or wind ensemble. These are fantastic tips that I've learned over the years when it comes to writing for these larger ensembles, and it pains me to see these common mistakes that a lot of beginning composers make, so I'm going to cover them all in this video. There are timestamps below as well as through the chapters of this video, so skip around if you want to. And what this comes down to really is writing idiomatically, which is simply writing for the instrument and making sure it's comfortable, it sings well, and you kind of know what you're doing when it comes to writing for each instrument. And in any large ensemble, there are so many different types of instruments and instrument families, and really just doing your research and your homework about how each instrument works and what their ranges are, it goes a long way. So I think it's important to make a distinction between concert band versus wind ensemble. There's a lot of misconceptions about how these two ensembles differ, and it really makes a big difference when it comes to writing for these. So for concert band, this is the larger of the two. This is where you have multiple players per part. So you might have like 10 trumpets on trumpet 2, you might have 6 clarinets on clarinet 2. This is just where you have a ton of players playing one part in the score. As opposed to wind ensemble, where there is normally one person per part. So you'd only have one flute one, you'd only have one trumpet one, things like that. And that's what's defined as like a true wind ensemble. Realistically, there's usually like 2 or 3 players per part, but this is where the texture is not as full as a concert band, but it's just a completely different sound that you're going for. And knowing how many players per part and having an expectation of what ensemble type you're writing for, it'll affect the balance, the textures you'll write, and how to properly bring out melodies and things like that. So it's just good to know what you're writing for from the get-go. And the big thing we're going to be talking about today is orchestration and scoring. One of the biggest mistakes I see young orchestrators make is to have too many things happening at once, is where you have a really thick texture. All instruments are playing. This is also called like 2D, where the entire ensemble is playing together. You don't want to have all players playing at the same time all the time. You need to have contrasts where you have a sparse, thin texture with only a few instruments, and then at the very special moments you can have the full 2D. Another mistake is writing outside of the tessitura for the instruments. Like I mentioned, there are many different instruments, the woodwinds, the brass, they all have many different types of instruments and instrument families, but get to do some research on each instrument and know the tessitura, which is the comfortable range of each instrument. You also want to know how different instruments function in the ensemble. There are naturally instruments that work better for solos, like oboe, flute, maybe solo trumpet, things like that. You won't have like a soaring melody on like the bass clarinet, for example, and that instrument is more reserved for like harmonic padding and just being there for more harmonic choices and filling out the texture that way. So just knowing like the characteristics and the traits of each instrument and the timbres really goes a long way to show how skilled you are as an orchestrator. And a lot of these things can actually be learned from score studying from very famous band composers, and I'll cover some of my favorite in a minute. It's important to know what difficulty you're writing for the ensemble. Depending on where you are, it can go from 0.5 to grade 5. 0.5 is for beginning band, like 4th grade, 5th grade, and then grade 5 or even grade 6 can be reserved for professional or collegiate ensembles. And there are a lot of different resources online as to what defines each grade level in between, and I can link some resources down below if you want to check that out. In general, know what grade level you're writing for. That'll inform you of the ranges you can use, the key signatures, rhythms, and things like that, and that'll actually help narrow down how you're going to write for the piece, and it'll be a good creative restriction that'll make sure you kind of know what you're doing. I also recommend just knowing a lot of book knowledge about each instrument, and that comes from studying orchestration books or watching videos online. One of my favorite YouTube resources is Orchestration Online. This is more traditional classical like orchestral music composing and orchestration, but there's a lot of great tips that can bleed over to band. On the book side, I have Samuel Adler's The Study of Orchestration. This is kind of the flagship book that you should have, or all composers should have. It's just tried and true, and there's I believe 4 editions at this point. I have the 3rd one, but a lot of great knowledge in there, and just something you should look through and be aware of. On the band side, there are not many orchestration books dedicated to just band. I have Brett Newton's band orchestration book. There are a few volumes of that, and it's a good resource. However, most of these resources for band are found online because it's just such a new medium. Band really only took off in the past 100 years, and compared to orchestra, which has been around forever, so there's not many books written on the subject, and I hope in the future that changes. And if you have any good resources strictly dedicated to band, please comment down below. I think that'll help a lot of people in the community. And I also mentioned studying famous band composers, and a lot of them have PDF scores on their website, like perusal scores that you can just read, or YouTube videos that are score videos. These are really invaluable to know how they decide to score for band. My favorite composer for band is John Mackey. He's fantastic, as well as other classic composers like Frank DeKelly, who does a lot more traditional band literature, and there are a whole host of other people that I prefer, and I've mentioned a lot of these in previous videos and on my website, so just kind of see what works for you. I do a lot of listening, like on Spotify, with just discovering new band music, so I'll just try to get exposed to as much of it as possible, and then that'll help you with the score studying, and you can just see how they score for themselves. The next big thing is engraving and layout, and this is one of the things that a lot of beginning composers just skip completely, but it is such a big and essential part of being a composer these days, is to have a good looking score. There are a lot of ways that you can improve the look and layout of your score. One of the biggest things is just improving the music notation software that you have. I know most of my subscribers use MuseScore and things like that, and just like free notation software like NoteFlight, but they can only do so much to easily customize and just have a professional looking score. You can do a lot on there to a certain point, but I think at a certain level where you reach like a kind of a cap, and you kind of have to go beyond that. So for me, I use Dorico Pro. I believe I'm on Dorico Pro 4, and I also use Sibelius in the past. There's also Finale. Try those if you have been using MuseScore for a while, but if you're just starting out, it's fine if you use those free ones, but know that there's more paid options that will give you a more professional look. The things you can improve in any notation software you use is having consistent measures per page or measures per system. A lot of beginning composers, their scores don't look particularly great because everything can be all smushed into one page. You can have like 30 measures on one page, and then the next page there's only 12. So have a consistent amount. For band scores, you can see up to like 6 or 8 per page. Just make it consistent, and that will make it a lot more readable if it ever gets performed, and it'll just show your professionalism and kind of set you apart from other beginning composers. Another big thing is having properly formatted and aligned text, tempos, and dynamics. If you look at any published score from one of the big publishing houses, you won't ever find a mistake, or for the most part, when it comes to just alignment and knowing how things are supposed to align, come from a lot of score studying. Like I mentioned before, there's a great book on notation called Behind Bars by Elaine Gould. I've talked about it a million times on the show already, but make sure you pick a copy up. It shows you how you're supposed to line these things and where, like under each note, how it like relates to other texts and the hierarchy of things like that. So check that out. It's not something you know right away, and if you haven't been in a band yourself, it's kind of hard to know those little minute details, but get to know how it's supposed to look on the page. Another important element is to have clean parts, and again, this comes down to new music notation software because there are a lot of limitations in the free ones, but make sure your score and your parts both are very well engraved and things are not missing off the page. Make sure things are aligned, make sure the page turns are clean, and like I mentioned before, having consistent measures per system so it doesn't look cramped or uneven. Have just like an even, consistent layout that you use, and having clean looking parts really is one of the most important things when it comes to having a successful rehearsal or reading session, because the more mistakes you have, the more questions that they'll have to ask the conductor and have to fix, and just make sure everything in the parts is reflected in the score. So you make sure you don't like have any discrepancies between those two. But clean parts is often overlooked for beginning composers, and that is something that you can do to set yourself apart. And also just add rehearsal marks like the letters like A, or the measure numbers like in boxed and bold text. That'll also help a lot in rehearsal times. I mentioned a few books already. Those are all linked down below if you want to pick a copy up of anything related to orchestration, and other websites that are free. Among those free online resources, one of the best ones is Andrew Hugel's Orchestration Guide. It's a completely free resource online that covers like a lot of the ranges and has a lot of video examples, so check that out. I always bookmark that if I don't have one of my expensive orchestration books around. So there's a lot of free resources like Orchestration Online, which is just a YouTube channel dedicated to tips and things like that. If you're studying music composition at school, there are reading sessions, and I just had a band piece read at my university for just like a little reading session. It was a grade 0.5 piece for like 5th grade band level, but it's really cool to hear like acoustic instruments instead of just the MIDI stuff. It gives you a good idea of how it sounds and the way you balanced it in the score, and those are probably one of the most invaluable resources you can have in college. But if you're not, don't worry about it. There's a lot of competitions you can apply for, but just having knowing your book knowledge about orchestration, the ranges, idiomatic, things like that, as well as having good notation and formatting, that'll set you apart. You'll be miles ahead of your peers. So if you're looking for more tips as a beginning composer and how to begin that journey, I have a video linked up here just for that, and there are a lot of amazing pieces of advice I learned along the way, so check that out if you're interested. If you'd like to support this channel, you can buy me a coffee down below. Just a little bit goes a long way to help support the content that I create for this channel. But anyways, thanks so much for watching, and keep writing.